Chapter 12. Jan Murphy placed the last of her late husband's clothes into a tattered cardboard box. She sat on the rumpled bedspread and stared at the 10 cartons before her. 12 years of a marriage, a lifetime of a man, sitting in containers that once housed groceries. She smiled to herself. Murphy would have appreciated the irony. She pushed one of the boxes aside and left the bedroom. She'd been sleeping in the living room since her husband died. She couldn't stand the thought of lying alone in that bed after so many years of feeling him beside her. The anger of his death had passed. The sorrow, the heartbreak hadn't really hit her yet. She was going through a period of numbness. She worried about Jimmy the most. He was taking it pretty hard. She was torn as to how to handle it. If she coddled him, treated him like a rare piece of china, she'd only make the 10-year-old more aware of the loss. If she tried to get him through each day as if nothing had happened, the boy would think she didn't care, that Daddy had died for nothing. She walked a hesitant line between the two modes of behavior. The last of their belongings were almost packed. They'd be out of the house tomorrow. The day after, they'd head for the moon colony. Unicorn had been good about that. They processed her request as a top priority item, Murphy being killed in the line of duty and all that. Red tape was cut. People at desks smiled and said things in understanding tones. She walked through an empty hallway. Jimmy called out, "Hey Mom, get a load of this!" She stopped, puzzled. She hadn't heard Jimmy this enthusiastic since before the accident. Accident. She trotted into the nearby bare living room. Jimmy was sitting cross-legged in front of the TV. He was watching the news. "Wait until you see this," he beamed. Jan knelt next to him. Jess Perkins, her hair laminated and sparkling under the studio lights, sat, a serious look on her face, in front of a bit of news footage from the week before. Jan gaped as the body of Councilman Ron Miller exploded through a third-story window and hurtled towards the ground. "Neat, huh?" Jimmy asked brightly. "It gets better." "Jimmy," Jan said, "this is a little intense, don't you think?" "Wait!" Jess gazed into the camera, her eyeshadow just the right shade of blue. "It started a week ago with the heroic rescue of Mayor Gibson and 2 of his aides by a lone police officer. His identity, a well-kept secret." The news footage switched to that of a press conference. 2 Omnicom executives, a Mr. Morton and a Mr. Johnson, flanked a Titanic cop, an armored warrior built like a fullback. "Yesterday," Jess continued, "OCP put an end to speculation when it unveiled an experimental crime management program. Its name? Robocop. Today, kids at Lee Iacocca Elementary School got to meet in person what their parents only read about in comic books. A real superhero." The footage dissolved into a scene at a crowded schoolyard where the Promethean armored man waded through an endless crowd of excited kids and reporters. Jan watched Jimmy grin as the giant lumbered through the crowd. She shook her head sadly. Murphy would have cringed at this media hoopla. He was a by-the-books cop. He did his job, he did it well, and he didn't brag about it. Didn't complain about it. A breathless reporter thrust a microphone in front of the Titan. "Excuse me, Robo, any special message for all the kids watching at home?" The figure turned and stared at the camera. "Stay out of trouble," was all he said. The kids cheered. A commercial for Bixby Snyder's It's Not My Problem sitcom came on. Jan still gazed at the screen. There was something about the mechanical cop's eyes that gave her the willies, something half-human, something familiar. Jimmy sidled up to her. "Isn't he great? He's better than TJ Laser. This guy is for real. Do you think they'll have any news about him on the moon?" "I'm sure they will, dear," Jan replied. Those eyes looked right through her. She dismissed the feeling. She was still shaky about the accident. It had only been 2 months since the funeral. Omnicon had pulled out all the stops. Pipers playing Amazing Grace, half the precinct there in full dress, classy coffin, closed. They said Murphy had been pretty badly mangled. She choked back a sob. Jimmy looked at her oddly. "Are you okay, Mom? Did I say something wrong?" "No." She smiled weakly. "No, I'll just miss this old house, that's all." Jimmy put an arm around her. "I miss him too." The news returned, and Jimmy waited breathlessly for another glimpse of his newfound hero, Robo. Instead, Casey Wong, crocodile smile in place, appeared over a graphic depicting the futuristic Delta City. "Still no official start date for OCP's Delta City project," he intoned, trying very hard not to sound like the young wimp he was. "Labour leaders have refused to sanction construction until OCP can guarantee the personal safety of workers in Old Detroit." Robert Morton, vice president in charge of the Robocop program, had this to say. The thin, nervous man glimpsed on the podium a few moments before with Robocop, now relaxed in a sumptuous office. "Well, I can't comment on Delta City," he began. "That's not my division. But at Security Concepts, we're projecting the end of crime in Old Detroit within 40 days. There's a new guy in town, and his name is Robocop." The camera slowly moved to the right. There, sitting in the office with the executive, was the super cop. Robo stared at the camera, hard. "I am here for one purpose, and one purpose only. To make the streets safe for good citizens, and to put the street scum where they belong, either behind bars or under the earth." "Too cool," Jimmy said, as Wong appeared with another story about the threat of nuclear warfare in some country Jan had never heard of. She didn't hear a word Wong said. She was still thinking of those eyes. Cold, yet passionate. Blank, yet determined. And beneath the blue visor, they still seemed to be blue. Very, very blue.